Further discussing Egyptian diplomatic efforts to end the Gaza crisis, always honored to have with us His Excellency Ambassador Mohammed Anis, member of the Egyptian Council for Foreign Affairs. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for coming.
My pleasure.
Well, starting off by talking about the intensified Egyptian diplomatic efforts to end the Gaza crisis, there were lots of challenges on the way. However, Egypt always remains supporting the Palestinian people. To what extent, from your point of view, concerning the success of those efforts, how do you see them?
Obviously, they have not reached full success because we still have a war going on.
Right.
But they have made progress. We have an international consensus about on the Egyptian initiative. We have an Arab League consensus. It seems to be the only viable proposal on the table. There are some additions here and there that people are proposing. There is no shortage of mediators and of countries and of parties who want to become part of a solution. I don't see this necessarily as a bad thing, although it may make things more difficult to coordinate. But we're still not there. We still have problems with translating this into a ceasefire on the ground.
What more efforts could be launched in order to reach the targets that we aspire?
I think one key thing is that obviously the Israeli war effort needs to halt. There needs to be a halt to that because we are approaching a time when it's obviously in excess of any justifiable objectives. The number of civilian casualties has become extremely high.
Right.
The kind of targets that are being selected, whether deliberately or not, obviously involve a lot of civilian targets. We're talking about hospitals, we're talking about mosques, we're talking about schools, we're talking about water stations. So we're talking about really an attack on the infrastructure, the civilian infrastructure of a large number of people, and obviously that contravenes a lot of principles of international humanitarian law. So obviously that becomes a priority. But we also need to understand that there are other complexities in this. Both parties have declared objectives which they obviously have not reached. Both parties have a dynamic between them. Each one of them is waiting for the other one to take a step and hinging their decision on what the other one is doing. And perhaps the pressures from outside are not strong enough to reach a ceasefire, although I think it is within sight.
Within sight, and Egypt has not stipulated any sort of condition in either party for the stipulation of a ceasefire.
Well, the Egyptian initiative is built really on a tried methodology, which was used back in 2012. And that is the principal conceptual approach is that the ceasefire is an immediate need and that all of the other issues can be discussed later on. Now, in this case, of course, there are the details and the devil is in the details. So obviously there are issues that both sides want to see happening either before the ceasefire or immediately after the ceasefire, and there is a lack of trust between them. So these are the complexities that everybody needs to deal with now.
Right. Egypt has never failed the Palestinians at any times of the crises. However, how do you see Hamas stand towards the Egyptian initiative?
Egypt is a state with international obligations and national interests and a very particular internal situation. Hamas is part of a Palestinian movement seeking liberation after many, many years of occupation. It's normal to have tensions between those two parties. And there is a history, actually, of tensions between the Palestinian movement and not only Egypt, with other countries in the neighborhood, with Jordan at one point, with Syria at one point, with Lebanon and so on. So this is perhaps inherent in the very nature of the relationship between movements of national liberation and neighboring countries, supporting countries that sympathize with their cause. It's natural in these circumstances to have a certain level of tension.
Well, how to overcome this certain level of tension from your perspective, Mr. Ambassador?
I think there is a need to rebuild the trust between all parties. On the Palestinian side, the classic kind of advice was that a unified Palestinian movement gives the Palestinians a better chance to make their case and also to reach agreements with other parties. The internal divisions between the Palestinians have not served the Palestinians well. So that is a primer. But apart from that, I think there is room for dialogue and for making practical arrangements. Egypt has Palestine as a neighbor, and that is not going anywhere. That becomes a long-term reality, and it needs to be dealt with. So I think there is some room for improving the relationship, although I think a different set of principles needs to come into this, because there are complexities, obviously, because of Hamas being a structure that adheres to the Muslim Brotherhood ideology. This creates its own set of tensions within the circumstances we are in. Hamas having a lot of constraints on its track record in Gaza. It has not been able to pay the salaries of Palestinian government employees. It has not been able to show any improvement in the daily life of Palestinians. It has not been able to show any improvement or progress on solving the Palestinian-Israeli issue. So there are real problems that Hamas is facing. And obviously, from a very realpolitik angle, there is a need to address some of the key issues that are being raised, that the livelihood of the people of Gaza, the humanitarian needs, the opportunities for education and work, whether fisheries, access to natural resources, access to neighboring countries. These are all very real issues. Now, it's on the other hand, the countries in the region, in terms of Egypt in particular, has real concerns about some of these issues, particularly the issue of access and the situation in Sinai and the role of Hamas and the positions that Hamas has been taking on a number of issues. There are real issues there. Now, is there room for a negotiated modus operandi, a realistic kind of way of living together? I think there is.
How can we help their realistic tone to be applicable on solid grounds?
I think the mediation efforts need to continue. I have been very optimistic. I've been proven wrong. I was hoping that we would have a ceasefire by now. I was feeling that the involvement of the Secretary General of the UN must bring with it some progress. He has put on the table the idea of a longer term humanitarian ceasefire, which is, I think, not a bad idea, given that we're not making progress on anything else. But I don't see anything coming together, and that's making me quite concerned that this is going to go on for a little bit longer, but not for very much longer, because I don't think either side wants to have a protracted conflict.
At the same time, will Israel be in favor of prolonging the situation? I don't think that it wants it to go that way, that longer.
I think both sides, I think, have no interest in a prolonged conflict. Israel, in terms of what it has declared as military objectives, has probably come to a point where it's either fully achieved or near that. It needs also to review its losses, and the losses are not only in terms of soldiers and civilians. Its losses also in terms of its lack of a strategy. In terms of a long-term strategy, this is the third time that the Israelis have been there within a matter of 5.5 years. So that shows that these strategies are not giving the results that perhaps Israel is looking for. So I think Israel is called upon to change its strategy. On the side of Hamas, you have a similar need, that there is no clarity in terms of the impact of a flare-up every 3 or 4 years or even less than 3 years, more often than that. We're talking more like less than 2 years.
Right.
Every time, and whether we don't see concrete results, we don't see progress on the diplomatic front, we don't see progress on the humanitarian front, we don't even see progress in terms of the relationship between Hamas and the core movement, the PLO. But we don't see we don't see it either with Egypt. So I think there is room for revising and reviewing the old strategies of Hamas.
Right. Other relations, Hamas's relations, for instance, with Qatar and Turkey, because Hamas resorted to them.
Yes, it's, I mean, I think in cases where you have a movement like Hamas, it will be trying as much as possible to maintain its support base outside its territory. So it's seeking support in terms of political support, it's seeking support in terms of economic support, it's seeking support even in terms of practical asylum. So it's not a coincidence that Qatar has provided asylum to some leaders from Hamas. And indeed, Qatar's role, diplomatic role, includes that element with a lot of movements around the world. So you will see that Qatar sees that obviously part of its diplomacy and part of its regional role is to host movements that are perhaps not acceptable on the international scene. So it's done that with Taliban, it's done that with other movements from Eastern Europe. So it has a track record in terms of using this as part of its diplomatic role. The problem, I think, is that whether these roles, the Turkish role, the Qatari role, can add positively to the central initiative, the Egyptian initiative. I see that because of the huge amounts of tensions between Egypt and those two countries, I see that this role becomes more of a handicap. That's the problem. And we also have to talk about international roles. We have to talk about the US role. We have to talk about the role of the United Nations. We have to talk about the role of a lot of European parties, and also the representative of the quartet, Tony Blair. All of these parties have been at one time or the other over the last 2 weeks involved in trying to bring something together. The great frustration is that we don't seem to be reaching an end result.
An applicable ceasefire on solid grounds. Mr. Ambassador, concerning the United Nations role, as you've mentioned, and we've seen the Palestinian Authority handing out documents to the UN Security Council and also to other human rights bodies, how could they help?
Well, I think so far the Security Council role appears to be very disappointing. I think that in terms of its central role, in terms of addressing issues that threaten international peace and security, I think there is an absence of a role. The session that was held issued a press statement, no operational resolution. It has been preoccupied also with the Ukraine in parallel with this issue. The Secretary General came to the region. He is not one of the most forceful and convincing Secretary Generals in the history of the United Nations, unfortunately. He has been trying, but in his own mild manner, I don't think he has come with enough, and it obviously has not been effective. So I think the UN overall is disappointing. We see now the Human Rights Council taking a resolution on investigating the
and they have admitted actually that Israel has committed war crimes in Gaza. So why don't they take action?
The commissioner has said that there may be a case for persecuting war crimes. This is a powerful statement. in terms of what UN officials usually use, their language.
But we need powerful reactions too.
Absolutely. So there is now a resolution to investigate. What is very disappointing is that many countries have abstained. The United States has voted against it, but the EU group has abstained. But then you have countries like Korea and Gabon from the African group abstaining. These are rather disappointing positions and surprising.
Can the Palestinians take such reports to the International Criminal Court, for instance?
So far, the Palestinians have decided not to join the ICC. In fact, most of the Arab world has not joined the ICC and has been very ambivalent about joining the ICC. You need to be a party to the ICC in order to raise a case. It is a complex process, but unless the ICC itself, the prosecutor, takes it up, it won't go anywhere. I would say that the investigation by the Human Rights Council would come as a first step.
Right, the first step, and the UN said that it is going to launch a probe of the Israeli aggression on Gaza, citing Mrs. Bailey's statements that the actions amount to war crimes. More on Gaza crisis on this debate, live episode of the Daily Debate for tonight. Let's watch this report highlighting the crisis, and we'll be back.
United States Secretary of State John Kerry and United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon voiced support for the Egyptian proposal for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in talks in Cairo. President Fattah al-Sisi has received on Tuesday both the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, who were visiting Cairo. Sisi and Ban discussed efforts to reach a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip and Egyptian initiative in this regard. For his part, Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry said that Kerry's visit to Egypt and the region is important and crucial in light of efforts exerted to reach a ceasefire on Gaza. Press conference held at the presidential headquarters in Heliopolis after Kerry's talks with President Fattah al-Sisi. Shoukry pointed out that both Egypt and the U.S. agreed on the necessity of pushing Israel and Hamas to approve the Egyptian ceasefire initiative, which ensure a response to the demands of all parties to the conflict. He called on the two parties to respond to initiative in a bid to lift the suffering of the Palestinian people in Gaza and allow relief efforts. Kerry arrived in Cairo Monday night and held a meeting with Ban, who made a stop in Cairo as part of his regional tour to find a peace agreement with regards to the ongoing crisis in Gaza. In a joint press conference, Kerry said the talks were held to discuss ways to encourage the parties to embrace a ceasefire under the right circumstances. He said that they are both here in support of and in an effort to help get implemented the Egyptian initiative for the ceasefire. Ban, on his part, said that so many people have died. It's very hard. It's tragic. We have to do all what we can to do. Ban, on his part, said that so many people have died and that it's very sad and tragic. Last week, the Egyptian proposal for a ceasefire was met with rejection from Hamas, who called for the lifting of the air, land and sea blockade imposed upon Gaza by Israel and presented this as one of its conditions to support the Egyptian ceasefire proposal. Kerry announced that the U.S. is providing $47 million in humanitarian assistance to try to alleviate some of the immediate humanitarian crisis. Meanwhile, the UN's top human rights officials warned that the 2-week offensive in Gaza, which has led to the deaths of hundreds of Palestinian men, women and children in the crowded coastal enclave, could have seen war crimes committed by Israel. The remarks from UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Nevi Pillay in Geneva came a week after Israel escalated its Operation Protective Edge from aerial bombardments into a ground campaign that has resulted in a sharp increase in Palestinian casualties. Citing cases of Israeli airstrikes and shelling of houses and hospitals, Pillay told the UN session considering resolution to set up an international inquiry into Israeli actions that there seems to be a strong possibility international humanitarian law has been violated in a manner that could amount to war crimes, referring to Israeli naval shelling that killed 4 Palestinian boys on the Gaza beach on the 16th of July. Pillay said that disregard for international humanitarian law and for the right to life was sharply evident. Every one of these incidents must be properly and independently investigated. She said that the UN Council agreed to launch the inquiry.
Welcome back, Mr. Ambassador. Well, the UN said that it is going to launch a probe, actually, of the Israeli aggression on Gaza, citing Ms. Paley's statements that the actions amount to war crimes. How could this be quite important amidst such investigations?
In the short term, probably it's not very relevant. It shows that there is an international concern and that there are operational aspects of this. On the technical side, you're talking about violations from principles of international humanitarian law. For example, the attacking party needs to distinguish between civilians and military in terms of targets and human beings. And when in doubt, then the target should be considered civilian. So these obligations of separation of civilian and military, that's one part. Another part is the proportionality of the use of force. That you cannot respond to a very small incident with a massive onslaught. And this is what we're beginning to see here. That the impact of Palestinian attacks on Israel cannot justify this level of attack. Now we're talking in terms of 800 people killed. We're talking in terms of over 4,000 injured. We're talking now in terms of 140,000 people displaced. And this incident with the UNRWA shelter is people who are displaced, who are taking refuge in a UN compound. So we're starting to see these atrocities that make it much more difficult to get back to a longer-term resolution of this conflict.
Right. Since Your Excellency talking about the respect for proportionality, Paley said the killings of civilians in Gaza, especially children, had already raised concerns over Israel's precautions and respect for this sense of proportionality.
Yes, so we've had, probably now we're talking in terms of over 150 children being killed. You have to keep looking at the numbers every while because they're growing very quickly, and the trauma that this creates amongst children is quite huge, and it's a long-term effect, and this brings us to the issue of a longer-term resolution. What we're doing in the end is to put bandages on a situation that has been festering for very long. Why is there this failure of all parties, both the immediate parties involved, the regional parties, and the international community, to make a breakthrough on this issue? And of course, everybody is paying the price. Egypt is paying a price for the instability that is caused by this problem. Egypt is a country that has a longer-term vision for this region, that needs to come back to peace and focus on development and harmonize and regroup and bandage these historical wounds that political dialogue and negotiations are the only way forward to resolve problems, and that this needs to become a model for resolving problems and getting away from violence. This is a holistic vision, and the counter vision is this vision of division, of focus on ethnicities and religion and historical wars that last for 100 years, and disregard for human life, disregard for civilian life. All of this vision is a counter vision that needs to be defeated. It cannot be allowed to win, because it's going to take us down a path where the price is going to be very high for everybody.
Right. Does the international community and the world bodies need to launch an investigation into those obvious and clear and recorded Israeli war crimes that has been earlier recorded?
We just we just went through this, didn't we? We just said that the Human Rights Council is launching an investigation. So
how about the international community?
That's the international community. I mean, that's the representative of the international community on this issue. I'm sure there will be reports by other bodies, because there are a lot of monitoring bodies that are interested in this, including Israeli human rights bodies that are producing excellent reports on violations by Israelis. So you can expect that there will be an avalanche of reports after this is over. Also, it's important to mention that some of the legal systems in the world have shown that they are willing to persecute Israeli leaders for war crimes. So we have seen some incidents of Israeli officials rescinding their trips, or sometimes leaving countries very quickly, because they were worried that they would be arrested and put on trial in the national legal system. This is quite an innovative step, that national legal systems can persecute for war crimes committed in other countries, in third-party countries. And the reason is that they are seen as global crimes that can be tried in front of any court in a civilized country.
Right. Israel announced more of its soldiers were killed. Isn't this just posing or undergoing some certain pressure on Israel to announce a willingness for achieving a truce?
Certainly, for Israel to have this level of human losses is a strain. But you're seeing in the balance, there is also a very strong consensus within public opinion in Israel to go after what is being presented to them as a real threat to their life. The image of the Palestinian threat is perhaps deliberately enlarged in the mind of Israelis, and because of that there is support for this operation, and politicians live on this. The political system in Israel, particularly because it is a divided system, it is a coalition system, there's a lot of competition and there are a lot of concerns about being outflanked, that you don't want anybody to come on your right-hand side and start accusing you of not doing enough. So that leads to this kind of auctioneering, where people are demanding extreme measures, and where there is a warmongering kind of environment. Now, how can you get around this? This is a reality. If it's there on the ground, I think you need to have also innovative techniques to face this. And part of it is the Egyptian effort to create an initiative that addresses the key concerns of both sides, to create a process after the ceasefire where both sides can negotiate, if not face to face, then at least proximity talks, where both sides Egypt can play this role of mediating between them.
Which is more liable, as you see it, Mr. Ambassador?
Well, the easier thing is the proximity talk, but the problem is now that Hamas has lost its confidence in Israel's commitment to promises like free access and creating economic opportunities for the population of Gaza, the release of prisoners who had been people who previously released at the time of the Shalit deal. So a lot of these things are real concerns from Hamas, and it's saying that we need some guarantees to ensure that Israel commits to these things. To be realistic, the ceasefire needs to become a reality. You need the ceasefire because it's urgently needed, and because civilians are civilian losses are very high. So it makes sense to go with the mechanisms of 2012, and I think with the involvement of the UN and we see Secretary Kerry also in Cairo. So obviously for the Secretary of State to be in the region and to be interested in this and devoting his time to it is also significant. So I think we have an opportunity, but we're still not there.
Will the U.S. succeed to exert pressure on Israel?
I don't see that there is a huge willingness on the side of the U.S. to really put serious pressure on Israel. But in the public domain, we already see that there is concern when President Obama calls the Prime Minister of Israel and tells him that an immediate ceasefire is needed. That's significant. And I'm sure that Secretary Kerry carried this message with him. Whether Israel is ready to heed this and whether Hamas is ready to play its part, we haven't seen that yet. But I still hope, because of my inherent optimism, I still hope that this can happen in the next couple of days.
A ceasefire in this deadlock, you still see it on site?
I see that it needs to come sooner rather than later, and perhaps not too far away in the near future.
Hopefully. Well, Mr. Ambassador, the Israeli economic situation is definitely still under pressure. Israel admitted that Hamas has succeeded to close its airspace, even to the U.S. flights, cancellations to many flights to Tel Aviv. So how far has this inflicted losses on the Israelis economic-wise?
I think it's more psychological and in terms of image. Of course, this is a precedent. It hasn't happened before for the Israelis, so it's the danger in this is that the reaction can be out of proportion and in the wrong direction, because it can lead to the Israelis thinking that we have to do more militarily rather than less, and that we have not achieved our goals in terms of eliminating the capacity of the missiles out of Gaza to land into Israel, or the destroying the tunnel network in Gaza, or going after the leaders of Hamas. And if Israel feels that the continuation of the threat is something we cannot live with, then we move in the wrong direction. So in all of these things, the military and the diplomatic, the strategic objective needs to be very clear. Otherwise, you risk in an environment where there is seeking appearances rather than concrete results. There is a big danger
Cosmetic
that people, that you start thinking that this is creating a certain image for Hamas in Arab public opinion. But is it creating results on the ground? That's another question.
Right. Well, the war is extracting also a heavy toll on Gaza's infrastructure, the houses that has been demolished. The Palestinian people are paying definitely the price, but who will pay for those damages?
We already see an international effort to mobilize funds for a rebuilding in Gaza. The question is, do you want to do this every couple of years? And does the international community want to continue the mechanism where Israel rolls into Gaza, destroys schools and roads and hospitals, and then you come and rebuild, and then 2 years later you go back to the same situation
and destroy infrastructure again.
And whether this money is going to be enough or not, because Secretary Kerry, the United States announced a contribution of 47 million, and Secretary Kerry himself said we know that this is not enough, and there will be a need for another tranche of money. I see today several other countries also have made contributions, but this remains within the humanitarian effort. Now, can Gaza continue to live on this lifeline? And is this the best solution possible. And for Egypt also, this is a question that, is this the best we can do in terms of Egyptian national interests? Or do we need to be more creative and to really find a better solution for the Palestinians as a whole politically, for the people of Gaza also in terms of livelihood?
What could be a creative solution on our behalf that is that would defend national interests, as you have mentioned, Mr. Ambassador?
I think the idea of bringing together the Palestinian movement is not exhausted. I don't think that the effort there has been fully exhausted. I think there is more that can be done. I think that in terms of the initiatives, the quartet has stopped the U.S. initiative for mediating between the Palestinians and the Israelis. The direct talks between the Palestinians and the Israelis, all of that has frozen. Henry Kissinger used to say the Middle East is like being on a bicycle. If you stop pedaling, you fall off. So there needs to be a diplomatic effort, but it needs to be something that moves into results. I also personally think that there isn't enough of an initiative directed towards Israelis themselves. You have a very big group within Israel that believes in peace and believes in Palestinian rights, and yet there isn't enough of a dialogue with them. So there is a lot of room for creative solutions there.
Are the challenges at Israel inside home, will they lead to a truce?
The present dynamics are that we have seen Israeli politics move to the right and to the more extreme. Now, but let's also remember that when Sadat made peace, it was with Begin, one of the most extreme elements in Israel. So one of the advantages you have is that the right can sign an agreement and not be attacked by more extreme elements. There will also always be some, on the fringe who are very difficult. But whether we have the right combination that can lead to an agreement, we're very far away from that.
What reasons can we attribute like a truce is on hand, that both sides do not want to prolong the situation and keep it as is, that there are challenges for Israel at home and outside? What more?
The outside pressures, of course, the pressures of public opinion. These are all factors that weigh in favor of a ceasefire. But there are other factors that take us away from that. Hamas has had severe problems in the past in terms of its performance, in terms of delivering results, in terms of its survival, in terms of its feeling that its support base with the Muslim Brothers in Egypt has withered away.
Right.
So obviously Hamas feels that its back is against the wall and it's losing ballast. But the question is, can Hamas become a viable partner to a movement to reintegrate with the mainline Palestinian movement to seek a solution? I think there needs to be also an opening. Let's remember that when Hamas started this process of reintegration with the Palestinian Authority, Israel and the United States were not sympathetic. And Israel attacked the Palestinian Authority, saying that it would not talk to them as long as they reintegrated with Hamas. So this is a much more complex scene than it may appear superficially.
Right.
And there are responsibilities on both sides. And I think both sides and in all sides in this need to work together much more than they have done so far.
Mr. Ambassador, what sort of challenges are there before a sense of reintegration on behalf of Hamas?
Hamas feels that some of the policies of the Palestinian Authority are not acceptable to it. For example, the Palestinian Authority has a policy of security cooperation with Israel. Hamas would like to see this stopping. Hamas has a problem with a lot of the political initiatives. Historically, Hamas emerged as an opposition movement within the Palestinian ranks to all of the Palestinian peace initiatives at the time. It was against the Oslo agreements, for example. It was against the strategies of the Palestinian Authority of recognizing Israel, recognizing previous agreements, rescinding terrorism. Hamas has seen terrorism as a legitimate means of conducting its struggle. So there are some key issues in which Hamas and the Palestinian Authority differ with each other. This last effort at reconciliation, where Hamas was forced to come together with the Palestinian Authority because of its internal failures and challenges in Gaza, was giving us a little bit of hope that perhaps, some kind of pragmatic coexistence and cooperation can exist between both movements. But that was very bitterly opposed by the Israelis. And that really closes options, because the more you put Hamas with its back against the wall, the more it's going to scratch at you and cause problems.
Right. We need more open options on the table, hopefully. And I still admire your sense of optimism, Mr. Ambassador.
Well, it's better than being pessimistic. You know, when you watch television every day, you don't need anybody to make you more pessimistic.
Well, hopefully a ceasefire is going to be in sight. Excellency Ambassador Mohammed Anis, member of the Egyptian Council for Foreign Affairs, thank you very much for your time, Excellency. And thank you, dear viewers, for watching. I'm Tagreed Hussein. Have a very good night.